Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for In the Driver's Seat with the Experts. Today, we will be joined by our moderator, John Strickland, and our expert, Jennifer Morrow, and I will let them introduce themselves in a minute, but I first wanted to go over a few AirMeet platform items. On the right hand of your screen, you will see a panel. The second icon is two chat bubbles. That is the primary chat. The chat is like other platforms, and everyone can see what is put in the general chat and respond. If during the program you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and if time allows, Jennifer and John will answer those. You can also privately message as well. Above the chat, you'll see an icon with two people. You can click on the name of the person you'd like to chat with and start the message. If you have any issues during the program, such as technical issues, can't hear, you can message me directly, and I can help you walk through any of those technical issues. With those housekeeping items taken care of, I would like to introduce our expert, Jennifer Morrow.
Thanks, Sam. Hi there. My name's Jennifer Morrow. I work for Los Alamos County. Anyone who's seen Oppenheimer might know a little bit about the secret county that was developed for the atomic bomb. I have over 30 years of experience. I've worked about 15 years as a consultant, and then I went to the public sector, and I've been in that for about 16 years. I'm also the APWA New Mexico chapter president. In my spare time, I'm an outdoor enthusiast. I love mountain biking. I love skiing, snowboarding, backcountry, and if I have a chance, I like to enjoy it with my two boys. John?
Hello, my name is John Strickland. I also work with Los Alamos County Public Works Engineering. Have the pleasure of working with Jennifer. I have about 38 years of experience, 23 years in the public sector and 15 years in the private sector. 25 of those years were spent in Alaska, and then the past 13 years was spent in the southeastern U.S. and the Caribbean. I've been blessed to work on projects all over the planet, from Alaska all the way down through the southeastern U.S. and New Mexico now, and Caribbean, and even to the South Pole. I always joke around, I have designed the southernmost water treatment plant on the planet, which is located at Amundsen Scott Research Station, about 300 feet from the geographic South Pole. In my spare time, my wife and I love the outdoors. We like to do a lot of traveling. We love to scuba dive and trail running. I retired from the Department of Interior last year for about 3 days and came to work for Los Alamos County. And so that's me in a nutshell. So today we're going to talk a little bit about communication, collaboration, and motivation. I'm going to be the moderator, and we're going to pick Jennifer's brain on the topic. And I think the first thing we're going to talk about is communicating effectively with diverse stakeholders. So, Miss Jennifer, here's the first question. So what's your thoughts about working with city officials and boards?
Well, like anyone, I've had mixed results. The one thing that I do find that works well is transparency and to get their buy-in. And some of the things I want to talk to you about is how to get the buy-in. One of the things we need to do is educate our counselors, our mayor, any boards we have to get in front of. And one of the parts is as our constraints as design engineers. A lot of times the mayor will want some project, or a counselor will have some project, and you literally are, you're like, we cannot meet our requirements and do what you ask. And so sometimes educating them on the things like the MUTCD, ADA restrictions and constraints, and then also AASHTO helps a lot. The other item that we often find is that most people think that a project can get turned around in a year or two. Those of us that do this on a long-term basis, we know that from the time we have project initiation depending on how big the project is. Do we have to get right away? How are we going to find our fundings? Do we need to have environmental studies? Uh, do we need to get our clearances, and also the SHPO approval? Is there a railroad around? There are a lot of factors that can lead to a project taking, 5, 10 years, and letting them know upfront that these kind of timelines, like if we need right away, add 2 years to your project. It's just being upfront about that makes them a lot more patient with you as you're going through the process. Another item that I find works well for educating them is to talk about the construction process, the constraints. I have 3 pictures up here that show, utilities always take the longest to go in. We have a lot of crossing utilities. That middle picture, you see like how long did it take them to dig that trench with all those utilities, especially if we have deeper trenches where we need a trench box. And then, so that's what's going to take a long time in the construction process. And then a lot of questions I always get are around the traffic control. Like if we shut down one lane and we shift over to the next lane, and then later we come back and set up that same traffic control. And everyone says, why didn't you get all the work done on the eastbound lane while you had it shut down? Well, explaining to them how we need to put utilities in first, and you're going to have water on one side, gas on the other side, hopefully. And then we come back and do our concrete work and our road work. And so we need to shift based on what phase we're in and exactly what's part of the construction. But explaining to them so that when their constituents call and complain really goes a long way. Pavement management. This is a great one if you're looking to get more money from your council, from your mayor for your budget. If you look at this graph here, this is my favorite one to put in front of council. As you see, we have like our great roads. It only costs about $2 a square yard to keep them up. Then we have this nice little yellow strip here. That yellow strip is the group of roads that are going to jump over to this next category. And you can see each one as you go, and see that little in between, that $8, that's the difference in cost to do maintenance for these. And look over here, after we get past the 3 columns on the right, we're going up quite a bit. We're going up $32 a square yard, 71 if we're doing full rehab. These are what we put in front of the council and explain to them why we need maintenance money, why maintenance is so important. And using the analogy of a car, everybody changes their oil, right? We all want to keep our car running. That's what these 3 columns on the right are. Those are kind of the oil changes. When we get down here on the left, those are when you've blown your engine. And everybody tries to maintain their car. We don't drive our cars, blow the engine, buy a new car. And that's something that's really important to get across to your council. I've had great experience in some places where we bring this in front of council and they give us the added budget. I've also had a frustrating experience where there was a very strong mayor type system, and we brought this to the mayor to show him and to bring to council to talk about our budget for our maintenance. And he had competing priorities. And so in that scenario, he did not want us to get in front of council because he wanted to make sure that what was brought in front of them were his priorities. So sometimes it can be frustrating working with your government agencies.
So I guess, were you able to garner some support, and how did the projects turn out? Maybe you can give us some examples of how this works for you in the past, Jennifer?
Yeah, I have a project I'm working on right now in Los Alamos County. Trinity Ave is the main stretch, one of the main arterials. And you can see on the right, it's 4 lanes. We had a road safety audit done by New Mexico Department of Transportation. And as part of it, they recommended a road diet. We looked at 2 different road diet layouts. You see the top and the bottom. And we presented this in front of our council and showed them the 2 options. And if you look, we have 2 travel lanes on the lower one. And this allowed we had a lot more businesses on the south side of the road. So this having this extra eastbound lane gave a lane for people to turn into the businesses. Los Alamos is also kind of sort of landlocked. We only have a couple roads that give us access. So if there's an emergency, we do want to make sure we have a means to evacuate the people effectively. And these two eastbound lanes would be part of our evacuation plan as well. When we presented this to council, they voted on which road diet we went with, and then they even passed a resolution in support of this project. So that's one way to get buy-in. Another one, I worked when I was in Las Cruces. I had a project, Belma Drive. If you look at the top left picture on Belma Drive, you see that the sidewalks are extremely narrow with fencing right across from it. If you look to the right, you can see that the right of way is actually way back in people's properties. And you can see where if we go to our right of way, we're going to shorten some driveways. So we talked to the property owners and had several public meetings, and we gave them two options because the city was going to 5-foot sidewalks on all new rehab projects. So we gave them the choice of they could either keep the back of the sidewalk where it is, and we would put in 5-foot sidewalks, which would narrow the road quite a bit, and they would lose parking on one side of the street. The other option was that we push the back of the sidewalk back to the right-of-way lines. And after several presentations and several meetings where, people in the meeting would be like, oh, I want it this way. And then you got the people in the meeting that say, oh, I don't want it. I want it this way, the other way. And then you have the people that don't have the ability to go to the public meeting. So we did an outreach program. We sent out a questionnaire to every property owner, only one vote per property owner. And we gave them the choice. Do you want to have, sidewalks stay where they're at and you have to have on-street parking? We didn't let them know which, or you'd lose one side of on-street parking. We didn't let them know which side it would be. Or we push the sideways walks back and you maintain your on-street parking. Well, the final vote was to push the sidewalks back. And so you can see in the lower pictures, Las Cruces is very kind. They rebuild all the walls and they rebuild, they make you whole again after a project if any of these houses are built into the right of way. So here's where you have the 5-foot sidewalks. You can see the fence has been rebuilt, brand new fence they got out of it. If you look at the lower one, it's still a little squishy for this guy to have some parking, but now he's got all on-street parking. And I actually drove this project with our fire department. They took me in their largest fire truck and we drove through it when it was trash collection day. So we got all the trash receptacles out, and that was why we said we could only have parking on one side, because it was already pretty narrow before this project. And if we widen the sidewalks, it was going to become unpassable for our emergency vehicles. So this is a great example of actually working with every single property owner and going with the majority on the final decision.
So, everybody has they always showcase their projects that were successful, but did you have any naysayers that you encountered, and then you were able to change their opinion maybe after a project or during the project?
Yeah, I have a couple experiences. This is actually not my project. This was when I came to Albuquerque. This is the intersection of Candelaria and Rio Grande, but it was a great example and often used when trying to switch over to a roundabout. If you look on the left side, that picture shows the intersection that had a high crash rate. It's a single lane forward, and then there's also a left and right turn at every side of the intersection. And they proposed bringing in a roundabout. And the neighborhood was completely against it. There were a lot of people that said, no, we don't want that. It's going to make things worse. It's going to be more dangerous. And luckily at the time, the mayor listened to what the engineers proposed, and he went ahead and went forward with this roundabout. One of the staff I worked with in Albuquerque was good friends with the gentleman. I believe he's in the lower left building, but lived right on the corner of this intersection. And he was telling me about when he was hanging out with them one day, the guy said, well, I have to admit that I was wrong. I was completely against this project. I didn't want it to go in. And he said, and since the noise has gone down, the crashes have gone down, my wall has not been hit since putting in this project. And he swore that his wall was going to get hit twice as much as it already was. So it's great to see where when we implement processes, things that we know are traffic calming, know enhance safety, that that getting the buy-in of the community. And as we put in more and more roundabouts and people become familiar with them, this becomes a great way to improve safety. I have another project that was a residential project, and it was in Las Cruces. And this is a small road. You can see the lower pictures show before the project. There was no curb and gutter. There was no storm drain system, no sidewalks. And we had several public meetings, and we had some very vocal people. And in particular, if you look at the top left photo, was a business called Art Obscura. And they said, well, you're going to be taking away all our parking in front of our business. That lower left is actually Art Obscura, but that was the most Google Street View didn't have a picture since they had bought it and converted it into their business. And yeah, they were concerned about parking because they were losing all the parking in front, and they didn't want to lose that rustic feel of, not having sidewalks and curb and gutter. And we went forward with this project. And I don't know, maybe 6 months, a year after the project, I was out having dinner in Las Cruces. And the gentleman that was very vocal at the public meetings, he came over to my table and he said, okay, I have to admit I was wrong. He goes, the first time we had a big storm, I went to the Art Obscura to go and with my mops and my squeegees and my sandbags, because I always get flooded in a storm. And he said, I didn't get a drop in the business, and I didn't have to sweep out any water from it. He said it was fantastic. And he said, and the parking's been great. Having the sidewalks for people has been awesome. He said, I apologize for being so vocal and against this project. And he offered to me, he said, if you ever have a project and you have a lot of people that are against it, he goes, I would be happy to come to your next public meeting and talk about my experience with going through this process. And I was like, wow, that's great. And I love to hear that from the public after we've done a project.
Wonderful. So, you talk a little bit about getting buy-in from boards and the public. I'd like to turn a little bit inward, if we could, for a little bit, and move towards the more inside of our departments, and particularly managing, silo challenges and hurdles. Everybody has experience within organizations with silos and hurdles and whatnot. What has been your experience to overcome those type of hurdles, Jennifer?
Well, communication, right? We've always heard this that's the key to breaking down silos. But you need the support as well. I've found that really where upper management has regular meetings, where upper management brings in the players from, maybe from public works, the engineering group, the utilities group, maybe planning to talk about things, it really needs to start from the upper management down. They need to create an environment where they support and encourage communication across your different divisions and within your teams. There's also the basic pick up the phone. We all text, we all email way too much. If the person isn't where you can walk to them, call them, have a conversation with them, ask them about their life, ask them about, hey, how's your wife or your husband or your kids? It really goes a long way to include a little bit of personal conversation in with your uh, when you're talking to someone, because then you create these relationships, and it's a lot easier to go to them when you might have a question, or knowing the fire chief and you want to find out if he can get by with this hammerhead that you're designing, but you don't have the room to meet your specs, right? So really, it's important not to default to texts and emails. Try and make your first going to their office first, and if that's not available, try and pick up the phone. I also worked in a place, Las Cruces, where they our Parks and Rec department, they organized a lot of sports. They organized basketball and baseball, volleyball, kickball. And it was a great way for me to meet people from the police department, from the fire department. And then when I had a question, I would just call them because I knew them, right? So those kind of interactions between different departments is really important.
You know, the part where you talked about defaulting to texts and emails and whatnot really resonates with me. And I go back to the days of COVID, right? Especially during COVID, a lot of us were working remote, and we had a lot more virtual interactions than we did face to face. If we all remember those days, and we still do that now, right? We're having a virtual conversation now, but when I was down in the southeastern U.S., I managed a team of about 10 people. They were spread all over 9 states in the Caribbean, and we went through a reorganization at the time. And we relied heavily on virtual meetings and whatnot. And due to the fact that we were all working remote, we wouldn't even be able to turn on our video cameras because it slowed the network down, during our meetings. So we didn't there were several new members of our team that we never actually saw them before. We talked to them for close to a year, never met them face to face, never even saw a picture of them. And after that year, we started coming back together, and having actually face to face meetings. We got to meet these people for the first time. First of all, their voices didn't match what we envisioned these people to look like. That was the first thing. But after that face-to-face meeting, I noticed that our productivity went through the roof, now that you had a chance to really truly sit down and visit with somebody across the table. The virtual meetings, the texts, the emails took that away. But once we were able to meet face to face, that changed dramatically. But I mean, I'm sure we all experienced that. But so back to productivity and whatnot, Jennifer, were you able to create more efficient collaborative work environments in some of the positions you held in the past than they were before?
Um, well, there's always the certain success rate and a certain failure rate, right? I'd like to say my success rate is pretty good track record. Some of the things to really be aware of when you're working with a team and need to get that team collaboration is making sure there isn't that stay in my lane mentality. Make sure that people know they can talk and that it's okay to reach out to other people. Sometimes egos get in the way. And so we need to figure out how to get people to let go of that, especially if they want to go one direction and that's not the direction you choose. You really need to make sure that they understand that they're listened to and that we heard them. But working with people when the ego gets in the way can be very difficult. And then what micromanaging, that can create a lot of lack of initiation from your team if they're micromanaged. They just want to be told what to do. The other one is personality conflicts. We're all very different people. And, this kind of makes me think of when I was working for a consulting firm, Bohan in Houston, here in New Mexico. And my boss at the time, Rob Richardson, when we were having this conversation, and he said, he goes, the one thing to always do is to appreciate the different personalities that, there's going to be conflicts, but you got to appreciate how great that can be because, who would want an office of like 10 Jennifers, right? Everyone would have the same expertise. Everyone would bring the same thing to the table. Everyone would have the same weaknesses. You really got to look at having different personalities as a huge benefit. That means you're going to have different kinds of input. You're going to have people that think out of the box because everyone thinks a little differently and approaches things a little differently. So really, we need to embrace having various personalities and we're going to have the conflicts. Those are the things we need to deal with, but we also need to be appreciative of them.
So let's talk about motivating staff for a minute. Do you have any tools in your tool bag that you've used and implemented in the past about creating more supportive work or a project environment And do you have any like real life stories or examples that you can give, Jennifer?
So interestingly, I had just gone through a leadership class when I came here to Los Alamos County. Um, and probably like most people on here, you've all gone through, if only one, that's amazing, right? Usually it's lots of leadership classes over the years of our careers. But this one really hit home with me. The instructor, she had us read those Five Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And this is the basic outline of that. Um, it starts with trust, right? And so if you have the absence of trust, your teamwork is going to go, it's not going to be there. And I think everyone can think back to a time where they've been in a meeting and their supervisor says, "Oh, we're going to do A," and you sit there and you go, "Okay, we're doing A," and you're thinking, "Ah, there's the option B. It might be a good option." But if you don't have trust, um, you're going to go up to the next one on that panel, which is fear of conflict, and you're not going to say, "Hey, what about B? We should talk about that." Um, and this makes me think of a story of my son, that's not engineering related, but my son was about 2 years old at the time. He's now 24, so it was quite a while ago. And I was flying to go see my sister in Bend, Oregon. And I was flying with my son and he decided to have a complete meltdown. He threw a temper tantrum getting onto the airplane because you're in line and you got to go and they have everything organized and that too you want to do it your way, not the way the airplane the flight wants it all done. And so I get on early with having a child for boarding and sit down and he's just screaming and crying and yelling and
I've been
you
there.
see all the passengers boarding and they look at me like, oh my gosh, I'm going to sit as far away from this person as I can. And this lady sits next to me and I think, oh, brave lady, gosh, and so the flight takes off and my child just passes out cold, right?
Mhm.
And the lady turns to me and she says, oh, she goes, that is so nice to see. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, lady, you are batty. And she says, no, she goes, I know that that child comes from a really loved, safe home. She goes, I work with abused children all the time. You never see an abused child that will act like that. She goes, it might be frustrating for you, but you should be proud that you are giving him the home and the care that he feels safe acting like that. And now I'm not recommending that you guys encourage your staff to have temper tantrums at all. But one of the things to think about is, are you giving them a safe workspace in which they can speak up where there can be conflict? Because conflict can be healthy, right? We're going to start hearing other people's opinions, thinking outside of the box. Um, that really is a healthy way to proceed. And if you don't have people that trust you, if they aren't willing to speak up, they're going to have a lack of commitment. When someone says, "Hey, why are you doing path A?" You're going to say, "Oh, I was told to." Right? They're not going to have the buy-in. They're not going to be committed to this project. They're just going to do what you tell them.
Right. So yeah, so on that note, like the lack of commitment and avoidance of accountability, I was thinking of a situation I had in the past where I had a staff member um, would always come with questions, or when they ran into problems on projects or whatnot, they would come, which we encourage, right? We want to discuss when there's hurdles or bumps or whatnot. But this individual would always come without any kind of solution. And so they would be looking for a solution. And that's our job as supervisors to do that, right? Is to help provide guidance through that. But the problem lay in that this person would come with these questions, with these problems, but wouldn't come with a solution. So you would help them and come up with an answer or guidance through the problem. And then later on, if the problem was good or bad, they'd always kind of step back away from the outcome and say, well, it was John's decision to go down that route or whatnot. So I noticed as time went on, I slowly started asking the person to say, hey, look, why don't you come to me with the problem and at least come with some solutions that we can work through together. But don't just ask, the blanket question without, thinking the problem through. And I noticed this person, once they started doing that, they started taking a lot more responsibility and were accountable on those projects, and they seemed to turn out better when they would come to, with solutions to the problem. But it, you know, but
Yeah,
anyway,
that's
go
a
ahead.
great example, John. It really is of how to get your team to give input and make them have that commitment, and then they're going to have accountability. The last part of this triangle, this pyramid, is inattention to results. How many times have you been working really hard on this project, maybe doing long nights? It's been going on for years, and finally you have closure. And then you go to work the next day and they're like, okay, here you go. Here's your next project. It's really important to spend a little bit of time and acknowledge your team, even if it's just the next day coming in with donuts and saying, hey, I brought donuts in because we finished this project and we need to acknowledge it. I had a small staff. I often take them out for lunch or do something like that for them. But remember, it's important to anchor the win, right? We really need to make sure that the team knows they're appreciated and that they did a good job. So at the end of it, we need to reinforce those positive results.
Moving on to the next part of the in the driver's seat here, Jennifer, do you have any advice or examples of how you have empowered your staff to overcome challenges in the effort to improve their productivity?
Um, I was really lucky in Las Cruces. I had this staff that they were very young, they were very green. One had just finished drafting school, and the other one was an EIT fresh out of college. And you know what, when I was mentoring them, some of the things I did was to, whenever like maybe planning or our other engineering groups gave me some plans to review, I'd sit down with them and I'd explain to them what I'm looking for. And I'd talk to them about why I didn't like this layout, or why this water line should be moved over 10 feet. We'd talk about it, and and we go through it very detailed so they understood what I look for on a set of plans. And then when we're putting out our own plans, I'd sit down with them and I'd be like, okay, we got this existing water line, where do you guys think it should go? And, maybe one person would be like, let's try on the east side. And it'd be like, well, maybe over here on the west side. And, really talk them through, let them, talk about, well, if we do the east side, look at these crossings, how problematic, where are we going to put our valves? Um, and and then I try and give them autonomy. I'd give them a little bit of direction, or give them a task with hopefully they understood the boundaries of the task. And but when I gave them that autonomy, I try and make sure they knew I was there, and I try and check in, like not check in every hour, right? We don't want to be micromanaging, but check in every couple days and make sure they're good, make sure they don't have questions, make sure they're not stuck. A lot of times people get stuck and they're kind of afraid to go to their supervisor to ask. So it's really important to have that trust in a relationship so that they always can come to you. And then, I'd already talked about recognizing staff a bit. That was another thing I make sure I do with my staff. I try and take them out for lunch. I try and, sometimes we go for a beer after work. So recognizing your staff and just letting them know you appreciate them goes a long way.
So do you have, again, I'm always the devil's advocate, right? Do you have any situation or examples you could share of failures to bring your staff into the team world?
Unfortunately, yeah, I do have some examples of failures. Uh, I had an employee who she wasn't as productive as the rest of the group.
Mhm.
And it really was difficult because it brought their morale down, and they were frustrated, right? Because they were kind of having to pick up the load where she was slacking off, and we had to get the work out the door. We did the traditional verbal warning, written warning, PIP, the employee personnel improvement plan. And she was one of those people that her computer crashed more than anyone I ever have heard of, you know, and I'd always say, well, have you gone to IT and check out? No, I just rebooted it and it was okay, but this and this and this. And it was just really frustrating. And the one thing I have to say is that when I did start um, the uh, process of putting on our personnel improvement plan and such for her behavior, it did bring up the morale of the other team members. You know, they recognized that I was trying to do something. They recognized that we understood what that they were taking on the load, and that really helped their morale quite a bit. Um, in the end, I think, you know, as we were going down our different levels of dealing with that person's behavior, they realized that they didn't want to be there and they took another job with the city. And I was talking to some staff and I said, well, you know, how's that working out? You know, and they were like, she is so happy over there and they love her. Everyone raves about it. She does a great job. And so sometimes we have to recognize that we can't really motivate a person. We can't make them behave the way we want to. And
Hmm.
sometimes you have to move on. Sometimes it's important to look at it and make sure, say, you know, you're not a good fit for the team. You're bringing down the morale, and it's not working. And sometimes they recognize it themselves, and sometimes, you know, we have to go through the procedures and take it all the way to termination.
Right. That's an interesting point. You know, I think a lot of times supervisors, especially when you're dealing with a challenging individual on your team, you know, we always seem to really concentrate on that interaction between you and that single team member, right? But I think often you find yourself forgetting about the collateral effects, everybody else on the team that's really not a part of that interaction, but they're on the sidelines and are affected by that. And I was thinking of one time in the past, I had a supervisor who we had a difficult employee on the team. It was very distracting, and the interactions in meetings and on projects, you could see the morale waning for the other team members because um, there was doesn't seem to be any kind of course correction for the employee. And in fact, some of the our other team members went to the supervisor and asked, you know, how could be, you know, dealt with this difficult team member. And the manager or supervisor's response was, "You're going to have to learn to deal with them," which I think was a bit of an abrupt approach. You know, sometimes as supervisors, you have to step in, especially if the rest of the team is starting to suffer from the personality or the difficulties with that one employee. Got to show some kind of help or correction, especially when it's affecting the rest of the team. And it seems like we forget about that from times to time. But
That's a great point, John.
anyway, so moving on. Any suggestions for creating a strong and unified team?
Um, you know, I've kind of mentioned quite a bit of things already, but team building, it really comes down to having some one-on-one time with your team, like try not to make everything about work. Celebrating birthdays, that's an easy one. If you have a small team, you can celebrate everybody's birthday. I had a job where I was overseeing streets and traffic, so it was quite a large group. So we did them quarterly. So we had in March, we had January, February, March birthday people, and I would go and get like 3 different cakes for everyone. And it'd give us a chance to all get together and visit and talk to each other outside of a work environment, even though we're at work. Um, if it's a social time outside of work, if your coworkers invite you out for lunch or for a beer or something, you know, don't say no all the time. If you continuously say no, they're going to quit asking. And those times are actually really important in making connections with your team.
Mhm.
Um, I already talked about rewards for good work. I, you know, done anything from bringing breakfast burritos or donuts or taking the staff out for lunch, taking them out for a beer. But you can also do team building activities. Hopefully, you know, your corporation or your municipality supports these kind of things. But you know, field trips and escape rooms, axe throwing, sports tournaments. You know, I talked before about sports. You know, where we had you know, different city leagues for basketball and such, and they were super fun. They were a great way to get to know the rest of the city employees and bring down those silos.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just going to go on to, I want to also acknowledge the failures. And one of the things to make sure is when there are failures to do lessons learned. We can't just move on and ignore them, right? We really do need to learn from them. And, I've, as a designer, oh, I can't spell errors apparently. There's an error. Um, as a designer, there's always something that happens in the field. Some of them are, you can't control, right? That's, utilities underneath that you didn't know were there, things like that. Um, but, sometimes there are things that you should have caught as the designer. And I got my construction guys out in the field correcting it. So I always made an extra effort to work with our field guys and to get out in the field with them, help them fix it, come up with solutions to the conditions that are in the field, and then also try and acknowledge that, ooh, I should have caught that. Sorry, and maybe I'll take them out for a beer or something afterwards, or take them out for lunch and be like, I just want to acknowledge that I could have done better, and I think that goes a long way.
Mhm.
Um, and and in saying that, I once was talking to our construction administrator, and he was telling me that he had this kind of problem. He said because his staff had started taking notes on, we had several designers, we had 4 different design groups in Las Cruces, and his staff had started taking notes on uh, who was getting which project. And apparently, if he gave the same project manager 2 of my projects in a row, that the other project managers would complain and say that they were getting special treatment. And I don't think I was this amazing engineer that did way better work than the others. But what I do think I was is the person that was willing to say, "Oh, I messed up. Let's figure out a solution," and to acknowledge that, you know, you don't just hand it off to the construction crew. As the designer, you got to be there for them. You got to work with them, and you have to try and help them with solutions when they need them.
Mhm. Very good. Well, I was going to try and get to some of the questions in the chat, but no one's asking any questions, so you may be getting off the hook today, Jennifer.
Ah,
So, does anybody have any questions they would like to ask? We got Jennifer on the spotlight here for a minute. So, don't see.
let's see.
Oh, what is? Oh, here's a question from uh, Jasmine. Jennifer, she asks, what is the silo effect?
The silo effect is when you keep yourself really compartmentalized. Like maybe you have a utility group and your engineering group, and you guys don't talk to each other. So I have a road project, and I'll go out and I will go and repave this residential road. And then the next year, the utility department will have a water project, and they'll come in and they'll trench through all my brand new pavement. And the public, when you go and trench through a brand new pavement, they often complain. So the silo effect is kind of the idea of um, getting communication across different departments, and it can even be across different team members. Like maybe you have a team member that does your environmental work and a team member that does your utility design, and they're all involved in the same project. So you really want to make sure that they communicate and that they're not compartmentalized and that they don't reach out to each other. It really makes a project go a lot more successful if you can break down those silos.
Good.
Did that answer the
Uh,
question?
I think so. So, yeah, so Thank you, Stephanie, for the comment there. Stephanie comments, no questions, but I love to hear similarities in other agencies across the U.S. And I used to work for the Department of Interior, and one of the efforts that they would do to break down these silo barriers, we had a program called Stepping Up to Leadership, and it was I don't think it was a 6-month project or 6-month session. And at the end of the session, you would go on details to and fill the positions that were outside of your roles. Like, for instance, you may, if you were an engineer, you may go out and act as a refuge manager for, several weeks, or a refuge manager would step into the role of an engineer, or a project manager for a few weeks, or a biologist. And I think that really helped in breaking down those silos when you had to walk in the shoes of somebody else for a day. It was amazing how much more cooperative, I guess, people would become with people on the other side of the aisle, if you will, after coming out of those programs. But anyway, um, let's see.
You
Any
know,
other?
does anyone in the group, do you guys have anything to share of what you've done to break down silos, or stories of that you find for rewarding or creating team building that you've done that has really worked? I think, John, we had talked before, and you had some things that you did for reward system. I think you talked about field trips to me before that you do with your team.
Oh yeah, we would have. Oh gosh, we would do field trips when we have our annual meetings in our regions. I organized some field trips to. We went to the CDC headquarters in Atlanta one time. That was really fun. We went behind the scenes a little bit there. I was in the Coast Guard for many years prior to joining, or before getting into engineering. Had some friends that were still active, and we went to some Coast Guard stations for tours. And at national meetings, we would have volleyball tournaments. And oh my gosh, each region would field a volleyball team. And if you won the tournament when we were at these meetings, you got to have the bragging rights for the entire year until next year. It was wonderful. But anyway, I do have another question here, Jennifer, if you're ready. So the question comes from Michael Baber. He asks, how do you deal with younger staff that are ready for management, but there is no room to advance within the organization? Ooh, that's a good
Whew,
question.
that is a good question, isn't it? Yeah, tough one. And the problem with this is that you're at risk of losing a really good younger staff because they're looking for advancement, and if you can't offer it, they might go somewhere else. But in recognizing that, sometimes you can work with your department in a moving forward process. Las Cruces actually had a really good process of where an engineer was, of moving up as to an EIT, and then once you had a certain amount of experience, they'd move you up to engineer 2, and then they kind of had levels within your position, and maybe you could work with your organization to have like an engineer 1, 2, or 3, that they don't get into the management, but they're at the top level of the engineer world. I've seen people make positions if you have the ability to do that and work with the organization. There's not an easy answer. I'll tell you that all of them takes a little bit of work unless you already have a really well set advancement for EITs, and as they get experience and as they get their PE, to move up in their levels as an engineer 1 to maybe up to an engineer 4, however you organize that.
Gotcha. Okay. I have a couple here. A statement. Cami Berger, thanks for contributing. She says for cross training, she has an example. She said in a previous job, she asked her staff to complete the workplace love language quiz so I could learn how they preferred to be recognized and try to tailor those recognitions for each person. I love this. I've heard about the love language quiz more in a personal relationships, but this is wonderful. And Cami, I don't know, I would love to see the questions you asked for that. That's actually brilliant. I have another comment here from.
I'm going to comment on Cammy's, and
Okay.
that is such a great point because motivation is different for every person. Some people are motivated by a little bit more money. Some people are motivated by time off. Some people just want recognition. And you're right, learning what your staff, what they're going to appreciate. Because, and I had one of my jobs, I had the ability to give a time off certificate. And for some of my staff, that meant a lot more than to others, I think that is a really great point of what motivates your staff and what's going to be the best reward system for them.
Right. Stephanie Boyce has a good statement here, an example. She says, our team worked on developing a vision and mission statement and 5 values that we defined and incorporate into our daily work. We recognize our staff members each month at our all hands meeting who have shown use of these values. That's a good idea for recognition and stuff. Brilliant.
That's a great one. There's also
Uh,
one above. Who is that from? Madison Dunn. I think we missed this one. One example
Oh,
from my previous job, encouraging cross-training across different divisions of work. For example, training wastewater staff on collecting E. coli samples if environmental staff is unavailable. Yeah, and John, you kind of hit that on your where you said, being in their boots for one day goes a long way. So
mhm.
that's a really good example, Madison.
And this goes out to Sam Tasker. There's the link for the love language questions are dropped in the chat box there. Thank you, Cami, for sharing that. I'm gonna check that out. So thanks.
Yeah, I'm excited too as well.
Are there any other questions? Let's go. Sam, we got about 9 more minutes. Anybody else want to contribute, ask questions? I don't see anything. All right. Well, I guess I'll return it back over to you, Sam.
All right. So, with no more questions coming in, we will go ahead and end this program. I want to thank Jennifer and John. Thank you for taking time and coming here and helping us all out with some issues that we have potentially have come into contact with. So, thank you, Jennifer and John, and attendees. This recording will be available to you guys in 2 to 3 weeks. An email will follow with instructions on how to do that. So, thank you guys again and have a good day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.